Hey,
All right, good afternoon, everyone.
how's everybody doing?
We are so glad to have you all here today joining us.
Yes,
Thank
indeed.
you.
Welcome to episode 4 of Let's Talk North Carolina Genealogy. And we are really excited today to be talking, to have come off of our Vital Records soiree with our first 3 episodes, and now to get into some deeper research topics, starting today with talking about North Carolina manuscripts. I am Renata Yarbrough Sanders, one of your 2 hosts for this lovely summer venture that we're doing. And I'm just so excited to be back with you again today.
All
Tania.
right, yes, good afternoon. My name is Tania Kuntz. I'm also a genealogist. I'm in the Nashville area, have been researching my family for, goodness, 15 years, and my roots go to primarily Eastern North Carolina. So,
And happy to welcome Ari Wilkins. You want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, my name is Ari Wilkins. I am in Dallas, Texas. I am a speaker and educator, and I also work at a library.
All right. I realized, Tania, that I never really say anything about myself other than my name, but I guess it's inferred that I am also a genealogist. And like Ari, I am a speaker slash lecturer and
yes,
do work with clients also. So, yeah, I guess I need to remember to say
yes.
something about myself. And for those who don't know, I'm in Newport News, Virginia. All
Yes, so
right.
very good to share that background so everyone gets familiar with each of us. So, yes.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
Mhm.
Okay, so we're going to get started because today we have a lot of content for you coming from Ari. And so Tania and I are just going to take a minute to share with those who are here today some of, one of our experiences with manuscript collections. So Tania, do you want to go first or do you want me to go first?
Oh, I'd be glad to, because I think mine will actually
Okay,
make a good lead-in for you. Because
okay.
mine's actually not so specific, but it's still interesting, and I think it highlights an important point. So here's my brief story. So I have a background in library science, and I received my degree from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And the building in which our program was in is Manning Hall. And it's located on a quad there on campus. So here's Manning Hall up in the top corner. Well, guess what was just a skip? What's the phrase? The hop, skip, and a jump away. Is that the right phrase? um,
Mm-hmm.
Wilson Library. Now,
Yeah.
Ari's going to tell us all about collections and point out Wilson Library, but Wilson Library has a great historical collection of manuscripts and archives that can be used. Well, I wasn't interested in my family history when I was in graduate school. I left in 1999, finished my degree, and I didn't get started in family history until 2004, 2005. So I unfortunately was not using the resources at that time. But since that time, I've learned so much about my family past, and I've come to realize that there's resources at Wilson Library that can help me. I have a picture here of one of my relatives. His name was Dred Wimberly. He's my third great uncle. Well, he was enslaved by Kemp Plummer Battle, who was a former president at UNC. And the Wilson Library has the Battle family papers. Well, Dred and Wimberly have a documented, I won't use the word relationship, but Kemp was important to getting Dred on the North Carolina General Assembly post Reconstruction, and there's some debate about whether or not Dred was the deciding factor on a very important vote on the floor. But I started to explore what does the collection have around the Kemp Plummer battle and his family. And they do, they have a great collection of family papers that I've over the years started to go through and been in contact with staff at the Wilson Library to get some of their help. And what's most interesting is that they've been digitizing parts of these records too. So I'm able to start going through those papers and look for things that might work for my own family history. So right now I haven't found anything specific to my family, but it has been interesting for helping me understand the context of the family that owned my ancestors, because it helps me provide some of that background as I start to write up my family history. So I just wanted to share that story real quickly.
Thank you. All right. Well, mine is, let me get it up here. Um, mine is sorry. Mine is a quick look at a letter that was found again at the UNC Wilson Library in the Southern Historical Collection, which is just stock full of family papers and even photographical collections. I'm sure Ari will be talking to us about in a few minutes. But if you know anything about the story of my research on my great-grandfather, Calvin Yarborough, then you know that I didn't know anything about him before I became interested in genealogy, and that a lot of my work has been centered around first determining if he was enslaved and then determining who his owners were. So one of the things that helped me after I found out that one of his owners was indeed Chloe Neal, who had been from Franklin County, North Carolina, but had moved with her husband to Tennessee. I learned that when her husband died in 1838, that Chloe returned to Franklin County, that she brought her family and her enslaved population with her. And it was really important for me to be able to establish a timeline for when that happened, as my great-grandfather was born just shortly after this move. And there were some documents that said he was born in Tennessee, and then more documents that said he was in North Carolina. So what I was able to do when I found this letter, it was actually a series of letters that were written to a pair of brothers who were Chloe's brother-in-laws. And they were letting each other know that Chloe, one of the letters said that she would be returning to Franklin County and she would be bringing her family and the enslaved with her. And then this particular letter from July 23rd of 1838 let me know that she and her children had arrived. So the underlined sentence says, "I am glad to hear that Chloe and her children have arrived in good health." And they had indeed arrived at Casein Plantation just outside of Lewisburg in Franklin County. So I was able to date when Chloe was back in North Carolina, and thus to determine that my great-grandfather, who was born around 1840, had to have more likely been born in North Carolina once they reached Casein. So this is just another example of how rich these materials are. And the fact that even though there's no mention of my great-grandfather, of course, that I'm able to make a determination because I know that this is the person who owned him. So that's my little share. And so I hope that has just whet everyone's appetite for finding out more about what can be found in these special manuscript collections. And at this time, we want to turn the program over to Ari Wilkins.
Thank you.
While Ari's getting her screen shared, we just want to remind everybody we do have a chat, so please feel free to interact with us there.
And also, thanks for that reminder, Tania, because I wanted to remind everyone to please put any questions you have in the chat, and then we will discuss those and get answers from Ari or from Tania or me, and when we do our after chat. So please go ahead and feel free to ask questions, and they will be addressed in the after chat. All right, Ari, it's all yours.
Okay, and so my screen came up?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, today I'm going to talk to you about manuscript collections. And as I mentioned, I work in a library. And when I first started working in the library, my first position was in special collections. And so anytime that I wasn't on the desk, I was always in our limited access area, nosing around and going through boxes and figuring out all of the things that were special about our special collections. And so first off, I want to define a manuscript collection. A manuscript collection is a set of unpublished documents, and collections can contain items from one person, a family, or an organization that's donated to a repository, such as a library, a school, or a museum. Manuscript collections can come in a variety of shapes, sizes, and formats. They can be handwritten or typed. They could be loose or bound papers. They could vary in size from a few items to thousands of documents. Collections are usually organized in a folder by folder and box by box method. So within manuscript collections, you're going to find business and legal papers such as correspondence, estate papers, bills and receipts, and personal papers such as diaries, oral histories, family photographs. Sometimes I say that anything that you can find in your grandmother's attic, you might find in a manuscript collection. So where can you find manuscript collections? You can find them at public, academic, and university libraries. You can find them at historical societies, churches, and museums. There are even museums that have private manuscript collections that are only available to research with special permission. Sometimes within the library's manuscript collections, you're going to come across an ephemera or miscellaneous collection. And these are random items that have been donated to the library that they're too small to constitute a whole manuscript collection, but they're still of interest. And so this is an example of a World War II ration book for the Rouse family. And each individual family member had their own ration book. And so another thing that I found in the ephemera collection was a single letter written from a Civil War soldier to his brother in 1862. Think about if that was your ancestor or someone that was related in your family, how special finding that one single letter could possibly be. And then lastly, I want you to consider all of the unprocessed collections that might be in any of these repositories back rooms. This is a photograph of some libraries' unprocessed collections. Some of these collections have sat on shelves for years due to time, staff, and budget constraints. And so I especially mention this to you because you're not going to find these collections in catalogs or finding aids. And this is why it makes it imperative for you to communicate with the staff about what you're researching, because the answer to your research question might lie in one of these grocery bags over here. And so for all of my nosing around when I wasn't on the desk, when somebody says, I'm looking for John Abbott, I'm like, oh, let me go. I know exactly where to go look for this. And so now let's discuss finding aids. Again, this is the limited access area at a library, and there are rows and rows of compact shelving containing these manuscript collections that are only accessible by the library staff. And so finding aids and the library's electronic catalog are going to be essential to the researcher in searching through these collections and finding out what's there. So a finding aid is an organized way to find out what the collection contains. I like to say that the finding aid is like the small print directions that you get with some new electronic, that you're so excited about getting this electronic that you toss those aside until the new toy crashes on you, and then you're struggling to figure out how to revive it and to get it to work right again. But they're really important in understanding the collection. Another colleague said that a finding aid was like a roadmap in navigating a manuscript collection. So now we're going to talk about the components of a finding aid. Okay, so the finding aid is going to begin with an overview of the collection, which could include the size and extent of the collection in lineal feet and number of items. It could contain an abstract, which is a brief description of the collection contents. It's going to talk about the creator of the materials, the language that the collection is written in, and the call numbers and storage location. And one of the things that's really important when you're looking at this kind of information, let's say you're making a research trip to some far known place. If the storage location is off-site and they have to pull that information for you, it may take several days. And so you want to know these things before you get ready to leave the house. The finding aid is going to give you information about access and use, if there are any restrictions that are placed on the collection. And more importantly, it's going to give you copyright restrictions. It's going to tell you how to cite the collection. It's also going to give you a clue as to whether the collection has been microfilmed or digitized. The finding aid is going to give you acquisition information, the how, when, and from whom the repository acquired the collection. And it might also give you an indication of if they expect to receive any future additions to the records. The finding aid is going to give you background information, such as the history or biographical information relating to the collection and how it was created. It's going to give you subject terms, including a list of terms and topics that are covered in the collection and are usually linked to the library's catalog that's going to provide the researcher with materials in similar categories. The scope and content section gives an overview of the types of materials in the collection and how they've been arranged. It will tell you about different sections of the collection, how the collection content is organized by type of material, format, topic, or some other filing system that was determined by archival staff. You know, in my experience in going through some really huge manuscript collections, at first I assumed that everything was in chronological order, but they might take all of the business papers out and put them in a separate section, and they might be organized by a person's name rather than chronological order. So just when I thought that I had seen everything that I needed for that time period, had I read that finding aid, I would have found out that there was a different section that had a whole that wasn't organized chronologically. So let's bounce to another collections finding aid for a minute. I was searching the Lewis Thompson papers and I was working on a family line. And I had been researching this collection for many, many years. And at one point, I went back and I reread the provenance of the collection, as in who donated the collection. And I noticed this woman's name, Molly Urquhart, had donated part of the collection in 1994, which for us, that's relatively recent. And so I'd seen a lot of information submitted by Molly Urquhart on Ancestry's website. And she is the second great granddaughter of Lewis Thompson. And so I emailed her and I asked her, among other questions, I asked her, was the donated collection complete? And were there parts of the collection that the family kept in a private collection? And to my surprise, she emailed me back and she told me that there was an entire room of documents that she hadn't donated, including portraits of the family. And so who would have guessed out of 4,600 items that there was still more to the collection? In my lifetime, I might not ever make it through these 4,600 items, but there's still more that are sitting in her house at home.
Amazing.
And it was things that were relative to my research. And so it was absolutely wonderful. And as a nerd and a genealogist, it just gives me chills when you find out that there's more.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
Nerds unite.
So going back to the structure of the finding guide, there is the contents listing. And the contents listing is going to give you a detailed description of the collection. Sometimes it's called container contents. And so this is a box by box, folder by folder listing of the materials that are stored in the collection. And the level of detail in this collection is going to vary depending on the collection scope and the repository practices. And so the example that I'm showing here is just a rather plain finding aid that probably hasn't been microfilmed or digitized, and it's just showing you a description of what's in each box and what's in each folder. This particular finding aid shows microfilm reel and frame numbers. This finding aid is showing us that parts of the collection have been digitized, which is helpful for all of us long distance researchers. So I want you to keep in mind that a finding aid is going to be your Bible in navigating your way through a collection. I want you to also remember that not every collection is going to have a finding aid, and not every finding aid is going to be published or online. And then I also want you to remember that what's in the contents list of the finding aid may not inventory every piece in the collection. I tell people it's like thumbing through a cookbook and closing it up, and somebody says, "What did you see in that cookbook?" And you're like, "I saw a fried chicken recipe and I saw a chocolate cake recipe," but it doesn't tell you about the chocolate mousse or a tomato pie in it. So it's worthwhile, even when you're combing through that finding aid and thoroughly combing through it, that you're still going through that entire collection page by page by page, because there's so many things that aren't indexed within that finding aid that might be exactly what you need. So now I want to talk to you about some collections of manuscript collections. I can't say it's one of my favorites. My very favorite collection is actually a conglomerate of manuscript collections, and they're the Southern Plantation Records. And this set includes papers from former slaveholding families that were donated to universities all across the South. And a historian worked to microfilm these manuscript collections from multiple universities and put them into one microform collection. And these plantation records include collections from the University of North Carolina and the Southern Historical Collection that Tania talked about earlier. So when I tell people about researching plantation records, I always point them to Gene Cooper's book, The Index of Records of Antebellum Southern Plantations. And this, to me, is the Bible. You can search through this book. It has 4 different indexes, and you can see if any of the plantation records within these collections apply to your research. Now, I also want to give a disclaimer that even though I love the Plantation Records, the Plantation Records collection does not include every plantation that ever existed. So if you don't find them within Gene Cooper's book and you don't find them within the Plantation Records collection, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. So because we're talking about North Carolina records, I want to highlight the Southern Historical Collection today. The Southern Historical Collection is a major body of manuscripts that are housed at the University of North Carolina's Wilson Library. And when we look at the history of the collection, the North Carolina Historical Society began collecting manuscripts in 1844. And their purpose was to document the culture and history of the American South. So even though all of this collection is housed at the University of North Carolina, it's not just about North Carolina manuscripts. You're going to find manuscripts from really all over, not just the South, but all over the country and even world. So the society closed in the early part of the 20th century, and the materials were donated to the Wilson Library. And the collection covers a wide variety of subjects, including Southern families, communities, labor, civil rights, and slavery, among many other subjects. And currently, the collection contains over 20 million items, which are organized into 5,000 individual groups. And so it covers periods of Southern history from the colonial era to the first half of the 20th century. So now I want to show you some of the interesting collections that I've come across in the Southern historical collections. The Cameron Family Papers is one of the more popular manuscript collections. It's also part of the Plantation Records collection. And so this collection contains approximately 33,000 items. Can you imagine 33,000 items? And so the Cameron family was one of the largest land and slaveholders in North Carolina. They owned over 1,000 enslaved people and almost 30,000 acres in the state. And the family consisted of planters and judges, legislators, and railroad men. And the family was involved in the development of the University of North Carolina, the state bank, and the Episcopal Church. So the collection starts with a letter as early as 1757. And this is an example from the Lewis Plantation Papers. And the collection contains 88 items, including a daily plantation journal that shows how many pounds of cotton each enslaved person picked per day, with notes on the side that just talking about the weather and who was sick with what illness. Another collection is the Henry Alexander Medical Ledgers. And this collection contains 2 medical ledgers containing the names of patients he treated and how much that they were charged. For this entry, Alexander charged John Allison to treat his sister Harriet and provide medicine to his wife, but then also he charged him for bull service of a small heifer. Okay, I have to say that I have a city background, so I had to go ask somebody that specialized in farm and agriculture what this bull service was, but basically it's like breeding. And so I was like, this is an all-inclusive service from a doctor. Let me just charge all of these things all at the same time. So you never know what you're going to find. And speaking of surprises in the most least expected places, in the back of one of Alexander's medical ledgers, he wrote his family history with each person's cause of death. And it shows their migration, their war service, and even where they were buried. So you would never think to look in someone's medical ledger where they're talking about business and find all of this personal and genealogical information in the back of it. But people just used paper wherever they found blank sheets of paper. This is where they used it. And this is why I'm saying it's so important to look through something page by page by page, because you might never know that this is there.
Right.
So the Derosse family papers is another really interesting collection. And the subject matter includes family life and social and religious and political and the military activity of the Derosse family in North Carolina, South Carolina, and New York. The collection includes a group of French documents, including a 1671 marriage contract. And there's also letters that include descriptions of the yellow fever epidemic in 1862. And there's even a tatted piece of lace within the collection. There's a photograph of Uncle Moro, who was an African prince that was purchased by the Derosse family. And on the back of the photo, it gives a story of Uncle Moro. It says that he was born in a region near Timbuktu and he could read and write in Arabic. He was banished by his tribe and then captured and sold into slavery and brought to South Carolina. He died in 1864 at 90 years old. So now let's discuss some sources that could help us locate manuscript collections, finding aids, and digitized records. WorldCat is an electronic electronic catalog that covers thousands of libraries across the world. And you can search for something within WorldCat, and then you can filter the results and select formats such as archival material or microform to look for manuscript collections. You can search for manuscript collections in Archive Grid, and it will tell you about the manuscript collection, and then it'll take you to the finding aid. There's HathiTrust. There's the Family Search Catalog, which is different from the card catalog, but looking at the catalog, it's going to be helpful to see which manuscript collections have been microfilmed or even digitized. I'm waiting with bated breath. As quickly as Family Search is digitizing all of their microfilm, I'm waiting for them to digitize the Plantation Records so I can access those from home or from an affiliate library. And then there's the Southern Historical Collection at UNC, and that's their website's going to tell you about the collection. It's going to show you the finding aid and which parts of the collection have been digitized. And I also want to add within the Southern Historical Collection, there might be many versions of a finding aid. There might be a finding aid that was completed in 1942 and somebody went back and redid the finding aid. So it's helpful to see two different finding aids because one might detail something more than the next finding aid. And so remember when you're searching these helpful sources, remember that you want to search by name. You want to search by the places where your ancestor lived. You want to search Civil War units or any kind of organizations or their employers or the schools that they attended. And you want to remember to use your fan club, your friends, associates, and neighbors. Just because your person of interest may not have their very own manuscript collection doesn't mean that their neighbor wasn't doing business with them or their neighbor wasn't gossiping about them and what was going on in their household. So you might find all of the information that you need about your ancestor in a neighboring farm's manuscript collection. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to you now, guys.
Okay, wow, Ari, that was so much information. I know that I will be going back and rewatching this show myself. Just want to thank you. And she's ahead of time. Look at her showing off. Wow, just amazing. I haven't seen too many. I've got a couple of things for the after chat, but so far, no questions. I have two questions. So listeners, please, if you have any questions for Ari or anything you'd like for us to clarify for you, please do type it into the chat. Ari, I just can't thank you enough, and I do hope that you will stick around. But I just, when you finished talking, I felt like saying, can I get an amen?
I know. The variety of the resources that we can get through manuscripts, I wish, more people know about it. So we thank you for sharing those types of tips with us and sharing that with our attendees, because you're right, they're so rich and need to be tapped.
Yes,
definitely.
Indeed. Well, let me get to our few announcements so that we can get on into the after chat if we have a little bit to talk about. So as you know, at this time, we usually tell you what's coming next, and then we close the content portion of the show and go into our after chat. So after that wonderful presentation by Ari, we're going to follow that up by having Doug Brown from the North Carolina Archives talking to us about research at the North Carolina Archives. So this is but one place where you will find manuscript collections. And, you know, the Southern Historical Collection at UNC really rivals the North Carolina Archives, the holdings at the North Carolina Archives. So if you enjoyed today's show, please make sure you come back on August 1st at 12:30 to find out more about research at the North Carolina Archives. Hopefully, many of the viewers have had a chance to visit the North Carolina Archives and Library, which are two separate entities under the same roof. But if not, this will help you to get ready for a visit there or for doing online research at the archives. As usual, you can contact Tania and me together at North Carolina Summer Series 2020 at gmail.com, or as you see on the screen, our individual contact information. So coming up next, we've gone on and we're ready to share the entire month of August, our closing month for our summer series of Let's Talk North Carolina Genealogy. So on August 1st, just as mentioned, we will have research at the North Carolina Archives with Doug Brown. On August 15th, and these are the extended sessions that we announced to you last week. So these will be about 45-minute presentations followed by our after chat. On August 15th, we will have the great Shannon Christmas, genetic genealogist, presenting the great North Carolinian novel, Your DNA and How to Read It. So Shannon has come up with a nice fancy title for us, and we're very excited about his presentation. And then because there is a 5th Saturday in August, we wanted to give a special treat, and we also announced this last week, that there will be a special Q&A session with the experts. We will be inviting back all of our previous guests, as well as a few additional North Carolina specialists to answer any questions you may have about your research or how to move forward with your research or anything that we have or haven't presented over the summer. You'll be able to ask questions directly of the panel and get on the spot responses. Registration is required for this event, and Tania is going to be putting the link in the chat. It is going to be it's a Zoom meeting / webinar. And so it will be limited to how many will actually get in. I'm going to let Tania talk a little bit about that in a minute. But we are really looking forward to this. This will not be broadcast live, but we will publish it after the fact. So it's a very special kind of private Q&A, open Q&A event. Tania, do you want to add something to my blabbering?
Oh, certainly. You're not blabbering at all. No. So as Renata said, this is an event that requires registration. So we've just shared the registration link in the chat. So please do go there and register. We will have a limit to the registration. Zoom has a limit. So it's important that even if you register, come to the actual event, because our registration is capped at 100. So if 120 people register, not 120 people will be able to get in, only 100 will be able to get in. So register so that you get on your calendar, and please, we would love to see you there. Just make sure you come so you can get into the actual room on time. But even with 100 participants, we just wanted to let you all know everyone may not get their questions answered, but we'll have some instructions when you're in the session on the best way to submit your answers. And we actually hope it'll be value, even if you can hear other people's questions and see what answers they get. So we're looking forward to this special Q&A.
Yes, and as we get a little closer to the date, we'll invite you to submit questions ahead of time if you'd like, but you do have to be in the meeting in order to have your question read. So even if you submit ahead of time, that'll get your question in, but if we don't see you on the meeting, then that question will not be read to our panelists. So we'll talk more about that later, and we're really excited about it, so we hope you are too. All right, so now it's time for our after chat, and we are ready to talk a little bit more about North Carolina manuscript collections. Tania, have you pulled from the chat? If not, I'm going to go to it, but I have to unshare my screen.
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
I did pull one question so far from the chat, and that was from Valerie, who'd asked after I showed the digital documents that was being scanned from the manuscripts collection at the Wilson Library, if they're planning to digitize all the collections. Well, you'd want to probably contact the Wilson Library directly, Valerie, because I'm not sure they're actually going to digitize everything. That would be a lot. It would be massive, but they may have a plan in place and could be able to share that with you. Or if you're interested in something specifically, they might have services to scan it and send it to you. So your best bet there is to check directly. I don't know, Ari, do you maybe have, or Renata, more to add to suggestions we can offer in that case?
On the University of North Carolina's website, which we're including in the links, there's a whole direction sheet for requesting scans of a particular item that you might find in the finding aid that hasn't been scanned. And there is a fee associated with it. However, I do want to say that the staff at the Wilson Library is so incredible and so responsive. And I think I was sending them emails like during the winter break, and they were still responding to me.
Wow.
And they were sending me all sorts of things. And so it's a wonderful staff. And so if there's something that hasn't been digitized that you truly need, consider the price of a plane ticket to North Carolina versus paying $5 to $10 for a scan. It's well worth your money.
Absolutely. And I also can't say enough about the staff there. And I had a situation to occur. And actually, if we don't have any more questions, I have something a little bit more that I'd like to share. But before that, I'll tell you what, let me share this because it's going to help me talk about what I was going to say, if I can get it. Okay, so here it is. Hold on, because this wasn't really part of the plan, but now that bar is in the way. Okay, so this is an example of what you would see with one of the collections from the Southern Historical Collection. And this is the Neal Family Papers collection, where I got the letter that I showed to you a few minutes ago about Chloe Neal coming back to Casein. And the way it works is, just as Ari has already explained to you, they kind of give you an abstract describing what's in the collection. And just like she said, it can't tell you everything that's in the collection. You can see that this collection has approximately 500 items. And then that's kind of just citation type stuff. Then it gives you subject headings that you can find the different pieces of this collection under. It gives some biographical information about the Neal family. Then it again describes the scope and content of the collection. And then you get down to the contents, which for this one, it's separated into 4 parts: correspondence, financial material, legal material, miscellaneous material. And then it describes each of those parts and kind of gives you some information about the items that you're going to find. So this collection has been partially digitized. You can see that the years and what's going to be here in these 29 scans. But then you get to folder 2 and it's not digitized. Neither is folder 3, but folder 4 is. So it just goes on and on that way. Okay. Well, what I wanted to tell you, I have been visiting this collection for 10 or 15 years. And so the letter that I showed you was one that I had seen a long time ago, but I went back last year with part of our Hawkins research group and went through the collection again. And that's when I actually scanned the pictures. Well, when I went back this time, there was a letter missing from the folder. But because I had notated it, now I didn't take a picture of it back in like 2005 or 6 when I was there, because I didn't have a smartphone, didn't have all that stuff. I was then paying for copies, and at that time, I didn't realize the total importance of that set of letters. So I didn't get it copied, but it was in my handwritten notes what the letter was, the date it was written, who it was written by, and the information it contained. And that was the one that first said that John Neal had died, and that Chloe and the children and all of the slaves, is what it said, would be returning to Franklin County. Well, when I went back this past year, that letter was missing. And I was able to work with the front desk because I had the notes from 10 or so years ago about that letter. And they have been phenomenal. They're still looking for it. They can't find it. But unfortunately, the whole reason I'm telling you this is that I want to tell you there are a lot of security measures in place in the places that house these special collections, but nothing is foolproof. These are original documents, and they sometimes walk out with people. And we think that's what happened to this particular letter. So I was telling you all of that just to tell you that. But when you go down, like I said, you can see some of the items are digitized, and you just click on the folder. And I think Ari showed this, or Tania showed something like this in her slides. But these are the scanned letters, and you just can read them right on your computer, and you can make them bigger or smaller. So
I want to add something too about those, and I'm sorry.
That's okay. I was just saying things do walk.
Yes. Within the University of North Carolina's website, there is a different part that has actually transcribed. They transcribed like a whole ledger book. And so if you're struggling with the cursive writing or the handwriting, it's all transcribed there for you. And I don't know if this was a special project that had a grant or something like this, like why this one particular manuscript collection was transcribed. But I also want to say then too, that you want to look for other resources that may have transcribed it, as in the Pettigrew papers for North Carolina. That's another manuscript and Plantation Records collection. And there's a whole set of, I think it's 2 books that have transcribed the letters from the manuscript collection. So if you're struggling with that handwriting and you want a second opinion on it, make sure you're looking at this. Make sure that you're looking at JSTOR to see if somebody's written an article about it that talks about either the letters or some document that's within it that may help you understand it better. The letter just may say, I'm having hard times, but the JSTOR article may say this person filed for bankruptcy, they were charged with fraud, all of these different things that may give you a whole different perspective on what you're reading within that letter.
Absolutely. And, just hearing Ari mention the Pettigrew papers gives me another point to make, because sometimes you may not find a collection relevant to the exact family that you are researching, but I am a descendant of Somerset Plantation in Washington County, North Carolina, and the Pettigrews were like best buddies with the Collinses who owned Somerset. So if it would behoove me to study the Pettigrew papers, because I'm most likely to find something in there about the Collinses or Somerset. So that's just another strategy, that whole friends, neighbors, associates thing to make sure that you cover. I did see another question in the chat. And
yeah, we've had a couple more.
Oh, we've had a few. Okay, I see the one from the Milky Way 83. And he says, do either of you, or she, I'm not sure, do either of you have suggestions for finding information on small tribal groups in Eastern North Carolina? Are they in the public library or only in the possession of the tribe? Anybody?
Is he looking for manuscript collections or just records?
It doesn't specify. Milky Way, if you'd like to clarify a little bit. I do know that some of the tribal offices do have their own archives and records. And I do think that there are some things available at the National Archives, but I am not an expert in that area, so I don't really have a sure answer on that.
You know, I don't have a sure answer on it, but the Oklahoma Historical Society has an amazing collection of Native American records that are not only attributed to Oklahoma, and I would call their library, because even if they don't have those records, they may be able to point you to the tribal area that does have records, or a repository that is specializing in Native American original documents that may be able to help you.
And
Yeah.
I know that we're all connected to several people who are descendants of those tribes. I don't see any of them in the chat room because I know certain ones that would have answers for that. But hopefully somebody will come along and maybe add an answer to our comment section on the video. Ari, someone is asking, as we all have, if you can speak to at least, this is Janice Gilliard, she wants you to speak to at least one of the photos behind you.
Oh, okay. Let's see. This one right here is Henry Augustus Riddick, and he was married to our shared ancestor, Renata, Maggie Bryant. This is my paternal grandmother, Velma Satterthwaite, as a young girl. This was her as an older woman here. Down here at the bottom is Lazarus Wilkins, which was, I believe, my third great-grandfather. So I'm working on my gallery wall and putting up all of my photographs here, my family photographs.
It's beautiful.
Yes,
very
it is.
nice.
And very inspiring too, right? As you work on your
really
history. Mm-hmm.
We have something from, oh, you want to do it, Tania? Go ahead.
I just saw another question. Maybe you did see it. And so we have a question from Ron, who's asking, is there any group specifically North Carolina related that requests volunteer transcribers like Family Search in the Library of Congress? Ron's done a project with the North Carolina Genealogical Society, but he has a lot of time right now. I guess several of us do, right? So what suggestions do we have to offer Ron?
So I've done some things also with NCGS, but I think Digital North Carolina is requesting volunteers right now. So if he wants to try Digital North Carolina, I think that's a good one. And I feel like there's another one that I've seen that's not coming into my head. But Ron, you and I are in contact. So if I can come up with the other one, I'll send that to you, because I do think there's another one. But Digital North Carolina is definitely one to check into.
And if I could also suggest, through the North Carolina, the NC Gen Web project, all the different county coordinators would probably love help transcribing things. So maybe you could read, if there's a specific county that you're interested in, reach out to the coordinator and see if they can offer some suggestions for content you may be able to contribute as a volunteer transcriber.
That's a great idea. Yep. Sonia Woods, I will tell you that all of our featured guests are actual North Carolina researchers. So yes, all of our guests do have at least some North Carolina ancestry. But Ari, the question from Sonia Woods is, great presentation. Are your ancestors from North Carolina? So would you like to maybe just share about the parts of North Carolina your ancestors are from?
Well, on my paternal side, on my father's side, all of his ancestors are from North Carolina, and they're all from Eastern North Carolina in Washington County, Beaufort County, Bertie County. And what's so amazing to me is they all stuck within that cluster of counties, Pasquotank County, and they're all right there on the border of Virginia, but none of them crossed over into the border. Like we have some during the Great Migration that went to Norfolk, but
Mhm.
for the most part, they've all stayed within that area. On my
Mine too.
mother's side, part of her line comes from Buncombe County, North Carolina, but my mother's side is Georgia, Louisiana, and North Carolina. But my father's side is exclusively North Carolina, and I can trace that family back to 1685. So I lived in North Carolina for 5 years, but I feel like I'm almost from North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
I know that feeling. Same here. All of my ancestry on both sides is from North Carolina. And I have found maybe two people from Warren County, North Carolina, who were actually born just over the line in Virginia, in Brunswick County. But they lived like next door to the family, but they just were over the line because the line was right there in the neighborhood. So my entire ancestry is North Carolina. I see that we have a couple of comments, and there's one from Margot Williams, who's asking if the person that asked about the tribes could specify the tribes. And she says there are people who have extensive information. Most records are still being collected. People like Forrest Hazel, Justin Patrone, James Nickens, Arwen Smallwood. So there's just a little bit of information for the person that asked about that, or some names to look up. And Genealogy TV, hi, says on Ancestry, search in the card catalog, keyword research Native American and Indian separately for separate list. I think, am I missing? And Milky Way is saying that the Waccamaw Siouan are not nationally recognized, so that may limit their findings. Well, that's something to follow up on. As I said earlier, I am not in any way expert on that. I'm one of those people that had the myth of Native American ancestry on one of my lines. And then my hills in Tyrrell County, well, the hills and the Bryants, but very specifically the hills, are said in several different pieces of literature and documents to have Native ancestry. And I do have about 3% Native American, but I have not been able to pinpoint that in the hills in my research. So I don't know. I just don't know. Not sure where it's coming from just yet. Well, if there's nothing else, have we missed anything, Tania?
Let's see. I did see one more question. So Dr. Murphy is asking, are there any free people of color communities in North Carolina?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
Like all over the place. I mean, some areas had more than others. Halifax, Warren, the areas that I research, and the Tyrrell County, where my hills and Bryants, they were all free people of color. We actually had, in our original planning, had planned to do a show on North Carolina's free people of color, but the dates for the summer just kind of ran out, and it really is a summer series. So we're trying to decide how, we might have some special episodes after the summer, because Tania and I also have areas of expertise that we would love to present on, but we kind of changed. That's how it started. That's how it was going to be. And then we got the idea to bring in our colleagues who are also North Carolina researchers and give them an opportunity to share their expertise. So we kind of pushed ourselves to the back burner. So I was going to do that. Tania's was going to do newspapers, and we just aren't sure what's going to happen just yet. So stay tuned.
Yes, stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
All right.
Okay, well, we just want to thank everyone who joined us today. We were supposed to shout out a little bit in the beginning, and I forgot, and I'm sorry. So I'm not going to get every name, but I thank Yakota Strong for joining us today. Thanks. History Before Us is here. Dr. Shelley Murphy, we love you. Janice Gilliard, we love you too. We love everybody. So glad to see Genealogy TV has found us and joined us now. Thank you so much. Marquita Fletcher, we see you. Ron Hayslip, thanks for being here again. So many names. Sanja Woods, and I don't know if you're Sanja or Sanya, because I have a close friend who spells her name that way, and she is Sanja. I see Calvin Dark, and he says, this is extremely helpful info. I want to reiterate the point about never knowing what you can find. And that's just so true. You have to read. I mean, I'm doing some work for a client right now, and I am reading court records from Northampton County, North Carolina, and I'm about to lose my mind, but I have to at least scan every single page of those documents looking for the surnames that I'm searching for. And it can be very tedious work, but I can't miss a page. And that's how it is with these manuscript records also. So, Margot, we're glad you're here. And just thank you, everybody. We're very excited. It's 1:30. We're finishing on time today. Thank you, Ari, for that. And we just look forward to seeing everybody back on August 1st. Make sure you do look for the links. We'll get them up for you in just a few minutes. All the links that were shared. And if you think you'd like to participate in the Q&A on August 29th, that link will also be available for registration. And we look forward to you being there for that also. So,
all right. All right, thank you, everybody. Remember, we do have a placeholder for the August 1st meeting, so you can go find that on our channel and hit reminder, and YouTube will help send you reminders for that too. So, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
All right,
Bye.
have a good afternoon and good rest of the day.